my um, expertise on this, and I can't tell who you're all smiling off camera, but my expertise in this is related to how the Board of Pharmacy regulates it. And so I hate to tell you that, yeah, legislators could carve out synthetic as well, and you could operate it exactly the same as you operate the naturally derived THC, but that is an option that you could look at. Yeah.
This is Marcy. I'll just offer up two additional references that you probably already have in the queue, but still in 5032-222, number 10 and 11. Those are provisions in Schedule 1, listing of drugs, in which if FDA approves a cannabis-related product, something with THC in it, to a schedule, we would automatically adopt that schedule into the state versus having to wait and go through the legislative process. It automatically comes into adoption for the state, again, if it goes through the FDA approval process. And then number 11 talks about dangerous drug analogs that unless it's specifically accepted or listed in another schedule, then it falls into the dangerous drug analog definition for where that maybe base structure is scheduled. So those are two additional references that might be helpful, 10 and 11.
Great, thank you, Marcy. Are there any more questions on the same page? Do you guys have any questions for us?
I do not. You guys, I think, are doing a great job. It's a big topic.
Yeah, this is Marcy. No other questions for me. I just appreciate the opportunity, and it's a challenging topic. And I think as much as you can glean from other states and what they've accomplished already in this space, that's a good pathway, as you've already referenced.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on and helping us navigate this language. You're welcome to stay on and listen to the rest of the council, but if you need to leave, that's fine too. We got a whole agenda of other exciting things to talk about that you might find interesting. But I think for our purposes of the Controlled Substances Act, we can close that agenda item.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll move on to Zach. I'll give you the floor to talk about your action item.
Hey guys, can everyone hear me all right?
Yes. Yep.
All right, good deal. Yeah, I kind of brought this up to Kathy a few weeks back, and I know it's been something that's kind of talked around in the industry a little bit. So I wanted to at least put it out there and maybe get some thoughts, at least something for us to kick around some. Delta 8, kind of being one of the more popular synthetic cannabinoids out there. It is naturally occurring cannabinoid. I'd had a guy reach out to me. He's a processor, I think, out of Bozeman. And basically what had happened was he'd done an extraction, uh, distilled his extraction to harvest the Delta 9 out of that, and sent it off for lab testing. And there was a high potency of Delta 8. I think he ended up destroying it. I'm not sure, but I'd found out that, I'd kind of thought about it some more, and I'm like, okay, well, there is going to be naturally occurring Delta 8 in these concentrates. So, a blanket ban, in line with the guiding principles of avoiding adverse effects on the regulated industry, a blanket ban adverse effects because, again, it's naturally occurring, and there's really, like we were just saying, it's hard to analyze the compound and decide how it was made. So that said, just something to think on. Is it a tolerance level that we might allow? Is there, I don't know. I don't know what it looks like. I can tell you, I'd kind of poked around some to see what Oregon had done. And I think we might have something similar in our marijuana law. Basically, what they did in their legal marijuana law, they posted that a processor may not treat or adulterate a cannabinoid product, concentrate, or extract with any additive or substance that's going to increase the potency or toxicity. So maybe someone there from the CCD can confirm if at one point I know it was a part of our law, but that would include, extracting CBD or CBG and synthetically converting it into Delta 8, Delta 9, whatever it is. That said, I don't know if that would be a regulation on these in the legal program. So maybe that's not the route we go. I don't know. It could be, I think that tolerance level, might be the best route to go and say, as long as your, you know, end product is testing under X%. I went back to look at some of my flower biomass samples and they were coming in as high as 2-3% Delta 8, and this is just normally grown flower. So it's in there. If you concentrate that, you could see, or maybe it wasn't high, but you could see, 5-6% Delta 8 in a distilled extract. So how do we address that as not making it illegal? It's unavoidable. Delta 8 has the same boiling point as Delta 9. It's going to distill over at the same rate. It's not that the incentives aren't there economically for a licensee, a regulated licensee, to produce Delta 8 intentionally. So, it'd be, obviously we can produce Delta 9. That's what our desired output is. I wouldn't expect licensees being trying to produce that. But yeah, so just something to think about, something to kick around. I don't know what people's thoughts are on it, but kind of just wanted to bring it to the table and hopefully have an open discussion about it and see what we can do to, uh, I guess, keep in mind with what regulations we come out that it doesn't have that adverse effect on the industry. Open to hearing others' thoughts. I don't know if Kathy, since we spoke about it, if you'd had any time to kick it around, but
Yeah, it's a great topic for sure. And I don't have a perfect answer. I think there's, like you said, lots of different ways you can try and address it. And I don't know, which would be the best way. I do know that other states are struggling with the same thing as well and trying to figure out, fair ways to address it. Another thing to add, another complication to this issue is labeling of products. So our labeling rules are only focused on Delta 9 THC. So if you get an appreciable amount of D8 or D10 or what have you, those cannabinoids are not included in the label, which potentially means that you could be selling a product that is more intoxicating than what the label says it is. And so that's another complication to kind of keep in mind as we're discussing this particular issue. Another, I've tossed around the idea in my own head of setting tolerance limits, but that could become a game of whack-a-mole, which and first off, how do you set those limits? Usually when some sort of action limit is set, it's based off of some testing and toxicology reports and finding a level of safety, and anything above that is considered unsafe and anything below that's considered safe. And there just isn't great literature out there to set tolerance levels for these analytes, of which there are many. I have considered getting lab testing data together from our laboratories for at least Delta 8 and kind of you finding what the average value of D8 might be in a certain type of product, and then the low and the high, and maybe the mode and the median, and trying to come up with a statistical parameter. That would really only be applicable to Delta 8 though, because that's kind of the only synthetic that our labs are testing for right now. So yeah, it's a difficult issue for sure, and I would love to hear any other thoughts on that. And like I said, Montana is not the only state having these conversations right now.
You brought up some great points there. I see Jonathan's raising his hand. I'll pass it off real fast, but typically, correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I see is most common is people are extracting CBD en masse and converting that to Delta 8 for the legal loophole purposes. But if our concern, which, I think a big concern of ours that we share is that you don't know what catalyst or acidic compound they're using to, convert. There's no lab testing to say there's still no residual solvents or pesticides in these products that are out there. So, these regulated ones that could contain Delta 8, bear in mind just something for everyone is that it is lab tested for QA, for pesticides, solvents, those things. Yeah, I don't know what the solution is either. I've kind of kicked it around some since this got brought my way. And yeah, it's a tricky one. Jonathan, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, all good points, Kathy and Zach. I'm just kind of coming at it from, maybe like in an FDA landscape, there are expectations for degradants in, products. That's my understanding. What those levels are and how they're established, I do not know. But it would seem like a reasonable approach to have some language where, Delta 8 as a degradant is expected. I don't know exactly how to phrase that, and I agree with Kathy. The whack-a-mole approach to setting a limit, it's would be hard, but we do have a ton of testing data available for some of them. For some of the like Delta 8 is a good one. And I guess, I was going to say too that like, Delta 8 is like forms from isomerization of Delta 9. Like that's where it comes from. So like if you distill something, you heat it, you're gonna, kind of drive things that way just through chemistry, normal chemistry that's seen. So again, like Delta 8 as a degradant, a normally seen degradant in, extraction processes, I think is an okay and normal thing for the marijuana industry, but how to administer that and recommend some type of language to address that, I don't know.
Yeah, John, question for you. Do you know the process by which Delta 8, or excuse me, Delta 9 isomerizes into Delta 8? Is that a process in the distillation or extraction that can be controlled and eliminated? I'm curious if this is, could be mopped up through better manufacturing practices, or if this is something that is just completely out of our control.
Great question. Not being a synthetic organic chemist, I don't know, but I would agree that there definitely somebody would be able to come up with some types of controls, for the manufacturing process to minimize or prevent the production. I think that's totally reasonable, but yeah, I don't know if the industry's there yet.
My understanding is typically it's a acidic reflux prior to distillation that's used in those conversions from CBD or Delta 9. So that's where some of that degradation could come from. But uh, scenario, Farmer Joe comes to my door and says, "Hey, I've got this biomass. I'm looking to get it processed into distillate for vape cartridges." I say, "Okay, great." I take his material, I process it. Well, I didn't know Farmer Joe had sprayed it with sulfur, which is a common integrated pest management strategy. Sulfur is highly acidic. It goes into my distillation apparatus and it comes out with a high concentration of delta 8 through degradation. You know, again, you'd send the biomass off for testing and it'd test it low delta 8, but then it goes into as a crude oil and it gets refluxed during the distillation process and degrades partially into delta 8. So just all the variables that we're going to be facing with the legal industry. Yeah, again, stumped.
Yeah, it's incredibly fascinating, and the chemistry is fascinating, and the whole process is novel and new, and we're learning more about this, with every passing day. And in that sulfur, instance, if you figure out your sulfur applied to the biomass is catalyzing your reaction to make delta 10 or 8, the way that I could see, that becoming a solvable problem would be to do what's called a corrective action or a root cause analysis, where maybe you continue using sulfur, but you use it at a different stage in plant growth. So it's not, being applied to the fluorescence of the plant. So yeah, I think it's an interesting take, and obviously this is getting made unintentionally in that specific instance, but again, this kind of for me in my chair as a regulator, it gets interesting when if you make so much of an isomer that it affects the intoxicating effect of the product and our label doesn't reflect that, then it becomes a problem. But again, I'm in the same boat. I'm not quite sure what the best answer is on how to fix it. But I think it's probably a multi-pronged approach where, regulators could set some reasonable tolerance. The big question being, how do you come up with that tolerance? And then the other part of that being, putting this back on the manufacturers and the cultivators to also continue to improve their processes. To the best of my knowledge, no state has set a tolerance yet. I know a lot of them are having these same exact discussions, but I haven't seen anything official come out. I have actually seen one state not set necessarily a tolerance level on the product, but a tolerance level on actually the peak area of the testing results. And so what this particular state is doing is if they find a particular cannabinoid that has a 1% or more peak area when compared to the entire peak area of the chromatograph, then they flag it, which I think is a pretty technical solution to this. And I don't know if we're quite there yet, but just throwing that out as something that I've heard in the grapevine. Oh, go ahead, John.
Okay. You know, the use of sulfur. So like an example of something in industry, you test your ingredients for the presence of sulfur, so manufacturing control wise, that would be totally something that a manufacturer would do. If there's sulfur present, well, then they won't run it through, the distillation process or whatever. Maybe they have another path that can go. So, I mean, an option would be to have, limits on the use of sulfur for certain extraction processes. I mean, that's the kind of, approach that the industrial world would use, I'd say, controlling, you know, these side degradants and side reactions.
Sure, that makes sense. I think that the sulfur example was an off the cuff example, so I maybe we shouldn't put so much focus on that random hypothetical. But you know, again, a big part of this industry is providing those processing services for farmers and cultivators, and you know, these are large batch, high dollar value processes, and you know, yes, I ability should lie on the manufacturer to close any uh, compound or variables, I guess. And the same as with the cultivator, you get what you get. But you do a run of guys biomass, and now you got $60,000 worth of product with 8% delta 8. You know, it's a just farmer Joe just trying to grow his product and earn a living. And so again, these are the challenges that we're facing. And I guess, you know, I get biomass. I guess I could send it through a gamut of testing to find out, make sure should come back right and everything like that. But, you know, the way business moves, it moves quick. You don't have time to sit there and wait for sulfur test results on a random batch of biomass.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult landscape to operate in. Lots of unknowns and lots of things out of your hands for sure. Well, I would invite
To kick
anyone
around.
to. Oh,
I was just to say, just something to kick around. We don't have to have the solution today, you know, but collective brain power, we got it.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, as you're doing your research, and if you stumble across anything that seems you know, useful to the conversation, then I'm more than happy to, you know, continue talking about this and share that. And you know, with our collective minds, I'm sure we can come up with something that at least is a worthy attempt of trying to solve these issues. All right, so any more discussion on that, or should we move on to our last item?
I was just going to say, Kathy, you know, acid, Zach mentioned it, but, you know, acid catalysis, that's like a way for delta 8 production. So, you know, again, you know, going back to the example in the manufacturing world, you know, a pH test for your trim maybe would be an option there, just for to kind of avoid the degradant paths or side product paths for people. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. You know, and depending on what that analysis might be, that could simply be, you know, something that like a at-home pH test kit, perhaps. I'm not quite sure what that extraction would look like, but it might be worth looking into if that becomes like a major concern for folks. All right, so I'm going to move on to our fourth agenda item, which is continuing to discuss draft definitions. And so when we left our meeting last week, I asked all of you to come up with some definitions so we could have a good conversation on this today. I sent out an email about a week after last month's meeting with kind of a roadmap of the definitions we discussed. And so I think we'll just move on and pick up to definitions again. Get my cheat sheet out here. Okay. So I guess I'll just kind of do what I did last time, which is we'll just start with the term, we can discuss, take some notes, and then maybe what'll happen is the next time we meet, I will provide all of you the definitions that we sort of talked about, and then perhaps we can start distributing a copy of these around via email so that you have them at your leisure and you can go over them and make edits, and then we'll follow up in the next meeting and discuss one last time. So with that, let's discuss the term synthetic cannabinoids. So this is already obviously defined in House Bill 948. I actually don't think that I do think that the definition in statute in House Bill 948 is actually pretty good, but I do think it could use some fine tuning in a rule definition. But did anyone come up with a definition, or I can lead off with what I've been playing around with as well? Okay. All right, so bear with me. This one's kind of long. It's got a couple of parts. So I'm just going to read this out loud. So I have synthetic cannabinoids means a chemical substance that is created through a chemical synthesis, reaction, or conversion by human agency that changes the molecular structure of any chemical substance, including those derived from the plant cannabis family Cannabaceae. And I'll be completely honest, this was kind of a hybrid definition I put together from Oregon and Colorado. And from our last meeting as well, we discussed not defining synthetic cannabinoid and semi-synthetic cannabinoid differently or individually, but to kind of combine those two into one term under the whole umbrella of synthetics. I'll read it once more. Synthetic cannabinoid means a chemical substance that is created through a chemical synthesis, reaction, or conversion by human agency that changes the molecular structure of any chemical substance, including those derived from the plant cannabis family Cannabaceae. Okay, so just a few notes I'll just say out loud. I included by human agency to sort of really hammer home that these are synthetics that are made by humans. There's no other way they would be created without human intervention. And also, the way that this definition is worded, it will include any synthesis from non-cannabinoid starting materials and synthesis from cannabinoid starting materials. Okay, so I'll just continue going here. Last month, we also discussed in these definitions, going on further to say, okay, well, this is what the definition includes, and this is what the definition does not include. So I went on further under this definition to say that synthetic cannabinoids does not include natural cannabinoids or naturally occurring cannabinoids. So being extremely clear that there is a difference between the two. The term also does not include cannabinoids produced by the decarboxylation of natural acidic cannabinoids without the use of a chemical catalyst. So being very clear here with that last part, that decarboxylation is fine. As long as you're not using a chemical to catalyze that reaction, decarboxylation is okay. So that's a specific carve out for delta-9 THCA to delta-9 THC. Okay, and then I go on to say the terms do include cannabinoids produced by the decarboxylation of synthetic acidic cannabinoids with or without the use of a chemical catalyst. So if you decarb a synthetic cannabinoid, it will always remain synthetic. And lastly, the term does include cannabinoids produced by the decarboxylation of natural acidic cannabinoids with the use of a chemical catalyst. And then I have a part C here, and I'm not totally sold on this, so please let me know if you think this is bad or okay, whatever. Synthetic cannabinoids, and the term may or may not include intoxicating or non-intoxicant cannabinoids. And the term may or may not include cannabinoids with a naturally occurring equivalent. So that's a mouthful, and it's probably kind of hard to digest that when you can't read it. And I'm just speaking to you this definition, but is there any comment on that at all? Is it bad? Is it terrible? Is it good? Is it okay?
I think it's as thorough a definition as I've seen anywhere. I haven't put a ton of time into looking for synthetic cannabinoid, but I put a little bit, and the definitions I found were maybe not as specific, certainly as yours, but even not as specific as I would expect them to be. But I think it sounds good, and it'll be good to see it on paper and then think about it some more.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just let that sit with you guys. And like I said, I think sending this out in an email so you guys can actually read it would be helpful. The next thing is the definition of synthetic marijuana product. And we discussed this last meeting, and the idea of actually amending this term to be synthetic cannabinoid product, because synthetic marijuana product is kind of a misnomer. These products are not marijuana, they're derived from hemp. And I think a less charged and polarizing term would just simply be synthetic cannabinoid product. Is there any discussion on that? Anyone think that's a good, bad idea otherwise?
I think it's good.
Okay. Anyone else? Any strong opinions on that?
I think it's good.
Great. And so that is a statutory definition that's in House Bill 948. And with the update in language to synthetic cannabinoid product, I think it would also be prudent to update the definition. So currently the definition for synthetic cannabinoid product means marijuana or marijuana consumer products that contain synthetic cannabinoids. And again, these are not marijuana products. They're technically hemp products. So I think a good update to this definition would be a synthetic cannabinoid product means consumer products that contain synthetic cannabinoids. So let's keep it neutral and unpolarized term and definition. All right, I'm gonna consider that. Okay. The next definition we discussed was chemical synthesis. And so this one from last meeting, if you remember, the whole kit and caboodle kind of comes down to this term and making sure that we adequately define it. The term that I came up with is heavily based in the AFDO definition with some additional language that I threw in. Again, tell me what you think. Chemical synthesis means a chemical or artificial substance created through a chemical reaction or conversion by human agency involving the use of chemicals and reagents as inputs to reach a desired output, as opposed to those of natural origin.
One more time.
Sure. Chemical synthesis means a chemical or artificial substance created through a chemical reaction or conversion by human agency, involving the use of chemicals and reagents as inputs to reach a desired output, as opposed to those of natural origin.
I think that one is good. A lot of the synthesis definitions are like, reagent A plus B makes C. You know what I mean? So that your definition would include like, potentially, catalyzed isomerizations, degradations, things like that. That's how I would interpret what you just read. Although it is nice to see those on paper too, to think about them.
Yeah, sorry about, yeah, I think that would be helpful for everyone. So I was trying to be very careful about, again, straying away from somehow wrapping up decarboxylation as a chemical synthesis. And so using the words chemicals and reagents as inputs was an attempt to try and do that, because our legal program, when you're decarbing, you're not using any sort of catalyzed reaction. This is simply just heat or pressure, light. And so in my opinion as a chemist, I would say that those three things don't really count as chemicals or reagents. And to further sort of clarify that, I, again, under this definition, have items that the term does not include. And so chemical synthesis does not include the decarboxylation of acidic natural cannabinoids without the use of a chemical catalyst, thereby preserving all of the edibles in our legal program. And then I go on to say the term does include the decarboxylation of synthetic acidic cannabinoids with or without the use of a chemical catalyst. I know that's a ton to unpack, and I know you guys don't have it in front of you. So I'll let that one sit again. It's a really difficult one. It's chemical synthesis is hard to sort of put into words, for sure. Okay, so this is sort of the flip side of the coin. We just went through and, I read at you a bunch of terms about synthesis and synthetic cannabinoids and synthetic products. Now we're gonna talk about natural cannabinoids. And so last meeting we talked about, well, should we define natural cannabinoids? And so here's a definition that I came up with that's generally from Oregon with some additional language. So a natural cannabinoid means a naturally occurring chemical substance present naturally in the biomass of the plant cannabis family Cannabaceae, which are separated by a chemical or mechanical extraction process directly from the biomass. So this would encompass, not only your delta 9s and your CBDs, but this could be any trace amount of delta 8, delta 10, CBG, CBCs, any of the natural cannabinoids. And again, just like synthetics, I went on to include what the term does include and what the term does not include. And these are going to be basically the same but opposite from what I read out for synthetics. So I'll just read them really quickly. Natural cannabinoids. This term does not include synthetic cannabinoids or synthetically derived cannabinoids. This term does not include cannabinoids produced by the decarboxylation of synthetic acidic cannabinoids with or without the use of a chemical catalyst. And this term does not include cannabinoids produced by the decarboxylation of natural acidic cannabinoids with the use of a chemical catalyst. Then on the flip side of that, natural cannabinoids do include cannabinoids produced by the decarboxylation of natural acidic cannabinoids with the use of a chemical catalyst. And the same part here, I have a may or may not include, and I'm not sold on this, so please, if you think this is weird, let me know. But I say natural cannabinoids may or may not include intoxicating or non-intoxicating cannabinoids and cannabinoids with a synthetic equivalent. So a lot to unpack there. Seems like nothing glaring is coming out to the council, but again, we'll get these in front of you so you can read them read them at your own leisure.
Question.
Yes.
I think I'm just not understanding. Yeah. The part where I'm not sure the intent of may or may not include.
Yes.
It sounds like, does that mean we're not? I guess I don't know how to process that.
So I think my thought on putting that language in, and I read it and I think it's kind of weird too sometimes, but so we have these two buckets, right? You have your synthetic cannabinoids and your natural cannabinoids, but we have cannabinoids that fall into each bucket. And so when and that was basically my basis for including that. Maybe that was a weird way of being like, hey, Delta 8 can fit into each bucket. You can have a natural cannabinoid with a synthetic equivalent. May or may not include a synthetic equivalent.
I get what you're trying to say. I think I just can't get my head around it.
Yeah. So when this gets sent out, you feel free to just mark this up, and if it doesn't make sense, we can take it out. That's totally fine. If you find a better way to say it, that's great too. This is just a super rough draft. So yeah, any help is greatly appreciated. This is quite the task. But yeah, to be completely honest with you, I sat with this for a while and I was like, this didn't make sense, or is this just complicated? Okay,
can I throw something in on that? Just sorry, an aside,
yep.
Just like, and I'm kind of coming at this from like, in the dietary supplement world, the FDA was asked to like define what all natural means, and they did not. So I think there's kind of a slippery slope with the term natural, it's hard to have a real definitive line, but you didn't mention like cannabis sativa, the botanical like name of the derivation of the cannabinoids as all natural. Was there some language in there in your definition that had that? And I just want to say too, though, that there are other plants that are now known to produce cannabinoids, apparently, or at least maybe it's been known for a long time. And even fungi, apparently, but I haven't verified that. But that's just how it looks.
That's a really good point. I wasn't aware that any other plant made cannabinoids either. At least, not a genetically modified plant. At least.
Yeah, correct. Right. Yeah, wild type plant. Yeah, I just saw a paper on, and I have no idea what the plant was. I'd never heard of it, but like apparently, yeah, there's some other plants that produce cannabinoids, albeit probably at low levels, and who knows which ones. But I mean, from the natural standpoint, it's obviously to link it to cannabis sativa, the botanical origin is worth considering with the caveats of it's produced in other plants too.
Yeah, so as far as the hint at taxonomy in the definition, basically I stole that directly from Oregon. I don't know that, the taxonomy. And so the way it reads as plant cannabis family Cannabaceae.
Okay, yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
would
right.
that
Yeah.
encompass sativa and indica and
Mm,
rubialis, I'm guessing?
I think that would be the intent. Yeah. But yeah, I'd have to I'll check on that one.
Yeah, that would be great if someone can double check the taxonomy on this. Okay, and so just like with synthetics, there we defined synthetic cannabinoids and then went on to define synthetic cannabinoid products. Same thing for natural cannabinoids. I threw in a definition for natural cannabinoid product, equal and opposite basically to synthetics, which means a consumer product that contains only natural cannabinoids. I think is pretty cut and dry, but like I said, read these, and if you think otherwise, definitely want to hear about it. Okay, so coming up on the last of these, sorry, I know it's a lot of me reading at you. So we discussed defining decarboxylation, and I think this is up there with defining chemical synthesis as a difficult one to actually pin down. I actually have two stabs at it. One's a little bit more technical than the other. And so I'm going to read you, I'll just read you one, I'll read you both and you can maybe see what you think. So decarboxylation means the conversion of an acidic cannabinoid into its neutral form, typically with the use of thermal energy, such as the conversion of delta-9 THCA into delta-9 THC with heat. The other option that I've come up with is decarboxylation means a reaction that removes a carboxyl group and releases a carbon dioxide, such as the conversion of an acidic cannabinoid into its neutral form, i.e. the conversion of delta-9 THCA into delta-9 THC using heat. So one's a little bit more technical, where it actually talks about carboxyl groups and carbon dioxides. And the reason I kind of was sussing both these out was because decarboxylation isn't just a process found in cannabis. It's found in lots of other industries and chemical reactions as well. And some of them are so well known that they're actually assigned different names. It's not just called decarboxylation. It's got a name of the chemist that came up with that reaction. And not all of them use thermal energy. Some of them are catalyzed. And so so one of these definitions is kind of more based in marijuana program, whereas the other is more general, yet a little more technical. I know this is a lot to unpack. I know you can't see it in front of you. And please, if you come up with something better, I am all ears and provide for a really good discussion, but that's what I have so far.
Yeah, the decarboxylation one is great to include for, in the chemical synthesis context and synthetic context for sure. Heat and time. Because old grass is been sitting around for a while. That'll have maybe some other things in it, degradants over time. Granted, it is heat, it's above 0 Kelvin, so
Great. So impairing was a term we discussed last month, and I'm pretty sure the council came to this group's consensus that this isn't really the time or the place to define it, and that we can discuss the term and provide perhaps some scientific literature on psychoactivity of certain synthetic cannabinoids, but impairing is really difficult to define. And again, this would kind of be a whack-a-mole approach too, because we can't just simply assume that every synthetic cannabinoid has same implications when it comes to impairing. So if we're all okay with that, just checking again that this probably isn't the time or place for a definition of impairing. Okay, great. Last definition, manufacturing. I did not do anything to this definition of manufacturing. I think it's pretty thorough. John, were you able to see if chemical synthesis happened to be also defined in this reference that you found this?
Yeah, I looked and it was not in that reference. But, you know, I did go down kind of using the same, it's like a legal dictionary that's online that basically mines like, you know, codes, including administrative rules from other states. And I did find a few chemical synthesis definitions, but I think the one you read earlier is certainly a really good start and something we can digest.
Okay, great.
And I'll take a look at what I mined out of the internet and maybe, you know, add something or not.
Okay, great. And I still admittedly need to look at our statutory language and rule language because we do have different types of manufacturing defined. And so if this is a recommendation we want to put forth, we need to make absolutely sure that this definition jives with what's currently in statute and rule. And I'm not very familiar with that. So something I need to look into.
Again for me real quick.
Yeah, sure can. Yep, absolutely. Okay, it's a long one. Manufacturing means the production, preparation, propagation, compounding, or processing of a substance, either directly or indirectly, or by extraction from substances of natural origin, or independently by means of chemical synthesis, or a combination of extraction and chemical synthesis, and includes any packaging or repackaging of a substance or labeling or relabeling of its container, except that such term does not include the preparation, compounding, packaging, or labeling of a substance in conformity with applicable state or local law by a practitioner as an incident to their administration or dispensing of such substance in the course of their professional practice. That's a really hard one. Like I said, these need to be in front of you. These are almost impossible just to digest when they're getting read at you. Okay, any comments at all on that? That was a lot. All right, we got about 15 minutes left, so that's good. So, just curious, did anyone get a chance to watch the two webinars that were posted to the resources page? Okay, well, again, I would highly recommend those. They're really good resources. And then last thing maybe, so tasks for next meeting. So like we've discussed, I'll basically send out this document to everyone on the council with the definitions and terms, and feel free to look at those and leave comments in the track function, please, so that we can keep track of what's changing. It'd be great if everyone would participate in that. The more input, the better. These are really tricky terms and they could have really big implications. And so take some time, put yourself in different scenarios, try and find the loopholes, poke holes in these definitions so that, we can really future-proof these as much as we can. The next thing I think we kind of need to begin talking about is the report that's due in September. And potentially, if anyone's interested, assigning certain sections of that to council members to draft up. So if you're interested in a certain section, or you think, you have a good handle on that and you want to do that, or maybe you want to pair up and attack, certain parts of this, let me know. It's going to be a pretty heady and technical document. And then the other thing that we were tossing around is that, we have multiple agencies sitting at this table. And I think it would be a good idea for each representative sitting here to write out a draft of their view on this issue, and then it could be used as materials for drafting the final draft. So, Tony, from your view as a pharmacist, what do you think about, this issue of synthetic cannabinoids and synthetic cannabinoid products? And then, from Steve and from Tony and for everybody. So, because we're all coming from different backgrounds. And so I think that would be a great way to kind of compile all of our thoughts together and have something to draw on when writing this report. Does that sound okay? So that'll be a task for each and every one of you. If you could get something down on paper in the next month, the next meeting, that would be great. And you can go from there.
You said state agencies?
Well, everyone on the council. So yes, you would definitely be included. Yeah, so you're like our
marijuana.
Yep, so our two public members, or the industry members, so that would include, John and Zach as well. So everybody's take is important. You have 10 minutes left, not bad. That gives me just enough time, I think, to bring up one other piece of this bill language that I've been mulling over. So it doesn't particularly pertain to synthetics, but I think it would be a good thing for us to also recommend is that there's some language in the House Bill 948 that I think could just be generally cleaned up. And this would be, I think, a prime time for us to just very easily throw this in the report for the legislature as well. So we all know that House Bill 948 prohibits synthetic marijuana products. It also roped in ag and updated the definition of hemp, the state definition of hemp under statute. And the drafter of this language, I think, made some of this a little bit more complicated than it needed to be. And so if you could pull up House Bill 948, great. In new section 1, sub 2 and sub 3. So this is sub 2 is basically saying that the only people that can sell marijuana are those licensed under MARTA. And it leads off by saying products containing or consisting of cannabinoids produced and processed for any type of consumption into the human body, whether marketed as containing or consisting of cannabinoids or not, that exceed a concentration or a THC concentration of 0.3% can only be sold by licensed manufacturers under MARTA. I think that whole first 3 lines can be stricken and you just put marijuana. That's basically what they're saying. Marijuana can only be sold by a licensed manufacturer. They basically kind of redefine it and say any product that exceeds a THC concentration of 0.3%. And so to simplify that language, crossing that out and simply putting in marijuana would be basically simplifying this language because it's kind of a mouthful to read.
The 0.3 is what jives with what's in 5032 as well, right?
Not in 0.3 is not in the Controlled Substances Act, but it is in the 0.3 is in the definition of hemp, which is in ag. So that would be my one recommendation. Does anyone have thoughts otherwise? The other similar but opposite sort of update to that would be on sub 3, where it says products containing a THC concentration of 0.3 or less would be hemp. So I think they could just stricken through that language and say hemp sold by any person other than a licensed manufacturer or licensed dispensary. And that would directly reference, the reader back to the definition of hemp, which takes you back to that 0.3%. And also what this will clear up is that, in House Bill 948, the definition of hemp was actually updated to include total THC, but it was mistakenly not updated in sub 1 or sub 3, because as you'll see, it says 0.3% THC. Really, what it should say is total THC at 0.3%. And so that would just be an easy way of clarifying that language.
So you would propose leaving in the 0.5 milligrams of THC still, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah. It's just an easier way to read that. And these rules, they're supposed to be, easy and understandable to a normal reader as well. And so just in saying hemp sold by any person with these, thresholds is okay. And the same for sub 2. Marijuana can only be sold by a licensed manufacturer. Those are my only 2 edits. So pretty simple, but it would be a really convenient way to put that as a recommendation to the legislature as they're reading our report.
You had discussed a few meetings back about some concern, like on number 3, where it can't have more than 0.5 milligram. It can't exceed 2. I think you mentioned something about some of the products because they're basically extracted from a product and then put into something more concentrated form. Are you still proposing to leave those 2 limits?
Yeah.
Because one loophole I've always wondered about is a manufacturer could just simply make an exceedingly small serving size to get around this.
Yeah.
Do we have a way to prevent them from doing that?
So
like I'm going to sell you a 2,000 serving size that's this big.
Yeah.
And it would then slide through.
That's a great question. That would kind of fall under the realm of egg, because that would be a hemp product, right? So, but yeah, I mean, we do see that if you made the serving size small enough, but the thing is, you still have this package limit as well. So even if you had like a very tiny serving size, if you packaged enough so that it exceeded 2 milligrams per package, then it would still be.
By 420 bucks. That's what I was trying to.
Yeah, so I'm actually not aware of any regulation that says, you as a consumer can't go and buy 20 packages and eat 5,000 servings of something to get intoxicated. But yeah, you could.
It's not a problem the state's seen.
No.
For getting around it that way.
No, not that I've seen, huh? No. Okay. Well, your guys' marching orders are to come up with, your agency or your department's view on this issue, and to be used as materials to make the entire report, and to go over definitions, which will get sent to you via email. And please, like I said, keep track of any edits with the tracking function. And then next meeting, we'll have all of this in front of us. You've had a month to digest, and we can kind of finalize these definitions, hopefully. Does that sound good for the folks online? Yes.
Are you wanting our
Yes.
agency? Are you wanting our agency what kind of field position paper to address all of the aspects of what 948 directed the council to do, or do you want us to really focus on 4B? This is the one about whether you make recommendations for the regulator. the whole thing or specifically that particular question?
I would say for A and B. Yeah. So A will be basically the definitions that you'll receive in an email, and then yeah, B will be the manufacturing. Yeah. Okay, 4 minutes to spare, guys. Thanks for your time and energy and effort.
Yeah, I'll add one last thing there. We got a couple of questions in the chat that I have answered, but all of our resources are going to be available on the Synthetic Advisory Council subpage on the Cannabis Control Division page. So please see there if you have any questions about documents we're using or resources we're referencing. Additionally, public comments are welcome, and there's an email address there. It's dorccd@mt.gov. We welcome public comments. That's all I have.
Okay. All right, thanks, guys. See you next month.
Thanks.
Thank you.